Hello everyone, welcome to my comparison video. We're going to be doing Spicer Standard versus Peerless 930. Now for those who know what they're dealing with as far as transmissions, you'll notice the fact that neither one of these is a Peerless. These are both actually Spicers, but what I'd like to do is show you that there are two different types of Spicers that you usually find on the market. Now the first of which we're going to talk about is the cheaper of them. The cheaper one is this one. You can buy them brand spanking new off places like surpluscenter.com, usually for around $80 and really cheap on the shipping because they're only about 32 to 35 pounds. Now, why is this one cheaper than this one, which retails in the range of, this one retails in the range of about 160. So 80, 160, what makes the difference? The first major difference that you're going to find between these two is their internals are swappable, but this one has universal mounts. It has 13-inch mounts and 16-inch mounts. Whereas this tranny, on the other hand, it only has the 13-inch mounts. The rest of this is just an extension block that's cast in. So this can only mount in a 13-inch wide chassis. This has the 16-inch mounts also. Another thing to note about these is their internals do swap. They're basically the same exact thing, but the cheaper one usually has longer axles. You find these a lot in certain types of John Deeres with the 36-inch cut, and some other models where they're compensating with a thin chassis by using extended axles. So the axles are usually about 2 inches longer on this particular series. So what we're going to be doing today, now that we've covered that, is we're going to be comparing this particular Spicer to a 930 Peerless, because these are basically a knockoff of a 930, and I'd like to show you exactly what differences there are between the two, so you can understand why you pay more for a 930. So we're going to set this one aside now that we've covered that, and put a 930 up here. Alright, so now on to the meat and potatoes of this particular video. This here is a standard Spicer, and this here is a standard 930. Spicer 930. So, what we're dealing with here is the top of the case. I'd like to point a few things out. First of which, they both have the same size input shaft, so that swaps back and forth. Their shifting is basically identical in the same location almost. They both have retainers for the balls as far as the shifting linkage. And they both have reinforcements down the casing. But as you can see on a Peerless, you've got multiple forms of reinforcement. On a Spicer, on the other hand, you only have singular runs in order to provide just back and forth strength and not actual twisting lateral strength. So there's a big difference. The casings, the thickness on the casings is a ginormous difference. These are extremely thin on the casings. These here are almost twice the thickness on the exterior of the casing. The other thing I would like to point out is that they both have 13-inch and 16-inch mounts, but the big difference between them is that these just have kind of a dowel that runs in the Spicer, whereas these actually have a block of aluminum that is cast for your mounting point. So another notable difference between the way that they're constructed on the outside for their integrity. So, the other thing I'd like to point out while we're here is brakes. Peerless brakes are set up with this tang piece that pushes back. Whereas on a Spicer, they're set up with this piece. Usually there's something that bolts through it in order to attach to the push rod. Another note when you're transitioning over to a Spicer. Some of them have a pivot piece that bolts through this and that you can adapt to your push rod brakes. So that's another thing to keep in mind when doing the transition if you're swapping back and forth between these. So at this point we're going to break them open, take a look at the inside. Alright, so let's take a look at the internals and let's discuss a few key notable aspects of the internal difference. Now, they both use the retaining balls as far as your shift linkage goes, except for the Spicer actually uses 2 in this particular model. So you have to find both of those when you take it apart. The Peerless, on the other hand, only uses 1. singular spring, singular ball. Notable difference. Another big difference you'll notice the moment you break these two open next to each other is that a spicer uses steel holders as their bearing holders, and the peerless actually uses brass. And these are actually made out of a special brass so that they'll absorb the oil. So there's a big difference between the friction between the two of them. This has a lot more friction and will heat up faster. This is far better. The next notable thing that you'll find when you break these two open is your shifting. These are both this is a 6-speed, this is a 5-speed. Now, the difference between their shifters that you'll notice is that if you're looking at your shifting rod, the shifting area, you'll notice on the peerless there's actually 4 tracks down it, and on the spicer you'll notice that there's only 2. As it comes down through, the spicer only has 2 retainers, and so they're notable at breaking off the shifting linkage on the inside of this set of gears. The peerless has 4 of them, so it's 4 times stronger. You'll also notice when you look at them, in the centerpiece where they retain the 2 pivotal points, the peerless has actually eliminated one of the screw holes and instead put in a giant block of aluminum. The spicer, on the other hand, has 2 holes, but they're very thin aluminum, and they're not actually a solid block. It actually comes up through and is encased. So there's another very notable difference. You also, when you're looking through these holes, can see the difference in the thickness of the metal. The next thing I want to point out is the gears themselves. If you look at the gears when you're coming up through on a peerless, your gears are actually bezeled. They've been rounded over in order to make them interact better. On a spicer, you have to be really careful because none of these have been beveled. All of the gears in a spicer are non-beveled on their edges, and multiple times I have been cut by them because of the fact that they don't finish them at the factory. They don't round the edges at all on any of their gears. Keep this in mind if you're working on doing the bull gear and working on the spiders internally. The spider gears on these tend to have sharp edges because they're not rounded from the factory, unlike a peerless, which has the rounded over edges on almost all its gearing. But while we're talking about that end, I'd also like to point out the bull gears. It's interesting to me the fact that the bull gear on a spicer actually is thicker by almost a good 1/4 inch as far as width. And I thought that was interesting. But what I also have noted is that they seem to be of a different size. And so right now we'll pull them out and I'll show you. So, as it sits right here, if we take the peerless and we set it on top of the spicer, the peerless is actually about a 1/4 inch bigger in circumference. And here I'll rotate it around so hopefully you'll be able to see it in the video. So if you look down on that from the camera angle, you should be able to see that there's actually an outline of the peerless bull gear around the spicer. So notably, there definitely is a size difference. The other thing to note with these is spicer, peerless, the teeth are much finer on the peerless. There's a much finer tooth pattern on the peerless, and yet again, these are square edged. These have been rounded over just a little bit from factory. So you can definitely see the quality and time that was taken to build the product. While we're inside the bull gear, I also would like to point out the spider gears and the pin that goes through them. This is out of the spicer, and as you can see, it's really small. This is my original locker block setup that I snapped off. As you can see, I snapped the axle, but you still have the original pin through. And as you can see in comparison, there is a huge difference in the size of that pinhole, which was for the original peerless pin, and this one, which goes into the spicer. Which is why I believe a lot of people have ended up sending me emails saying do not try to posi lock by welding the inside of these, because these will actually just twist and snap off inside the transmission. Which, now that I've seen the difference, I thoroughly agree it probably would. So there we are, we've covered a whole ton of differences between the two units. Now, is there a difference as far as quality? Amazingly. The Spicer, they definitely cut every corner they could. The Peerless, they took the effort to go through and finish gears. They took the effort to put in 2 extra shifting tongs. They put in the effort to use better quality chain. It's just a whole totally different ball game between the two. Now, I know you haters are going to get down and you're going to start posting in the comments. Please at least keep it to actual text information that can be verified and not just a "you suck." Anyways, thanks guys. I gotta go lock up this Spicer so that I can see if I can blow it up. Haven't quite decided how I'm gonna lock it though. We'll see.